It's 6 o'clock, everyone, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. I'm Sarah Enright. I'm the local History Librarian Specialist here at the Sioux City Public Library. Thank you all for joining me this evening for another Sioux City True Crime Talk. Before we get started, I want to mention that our summer reading program will be beginning soon for both kids and adults. Many of the promotional material on how to participate are already out. So you can find these on some of our displays and at each one of our desks. We have tons of events going on and many ways to participate to earn some really cool prizes. So if you haven't already, make sure you grab a kid's calendar and an adult summer reading brochure and read about all of the cool things that we are doing. All right, on to the crime. So tonight, I'll be revisiting 10 cases from Sioux City's history that I've previously covered. These are cases that have either captivated me personally or that I've been asked about many times. They span a wide range of years and circumstances and include both solved crimes and unsolved mysteries. Although I won't be covering Terry McCauley's case again tonight, I do want to mention it as an example of why we keep these stories visible. After more than 40 years, the primary suspect in her 1983 homicide was finally arrested this year, and his court proceedings are set to begin soon. It's a powerful reminder that justice can still be served even decades later, and that keeping these cases in the public eye truly matters. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the sensitive nature of tonight's topic. True crime can be fascinating, but it's important to remember these stories involve real people and real tragedy. Some of the cases I'll discuss tonight involve children, which can be especially difficult to hear. I aim to present these stories with care and avoid graphic details unless pertinent to the narrative, but please know you are welcome to step out or take a break at any time if you feel uncomfortable. Additionally, some of the historical documents and news articles featured in my slides may contain outdated or inappropriate language. While I can't alter the original wording without misrepresenting the past, I will use non-discriminatory terms in my narration to reflect the growth that we've made as a society. I'll pause after each case for questions or comments, so please feel free to participate as you wish. With that, let's dive into Sioux City's most infamous cases. My first case is one that has puzzled Sioux City for more than 60 years, the mysterious disappearance of Thomas Miles Doherty. Thomas Miles Doherty, who went by Miles, was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army and a true war hero. During World War II, he fought in Normandy, where he suffered a devastating injury that resulted in the loss of both arms. Miles didn't let these injuries define him or stop him from living a full life. When he returned to the United States, he was fitted with mechanical prosthetics with hooks in place of hands. These became a symbol of his resilience and dedication, and he was often seen proudly wearing his American vet's cap. On the morning of January 12, 1961, Miles followed his usual routine. He drove his specially equipped 1954 Hunter Green Ford Tudor to the Metropolitan Cafe at 801 4th Street for breakfast. After enjoying his meal and chatting with other regulars, he left the cafe. Unbeknownst to all, this would be the last time Miles was seen alive. As the day went on and Miles didn't return home, concern began to grow among his family and friends. The exact details of when he was officially declared missing are unclear, but it quickly became apparent that something was wrong. A search effort was launched almost immediately. Missing person flyers were distributed throughout the city, and a $650 reward was offered for any information leading to his safe return or the identification of anyone responsible for his disappearance. News that Miles was missing spread quickly. Articles appeared in the journal, and the search expanded by land, air, and water. Despite these extensive efforts, there were no leads, no body, no car, and no evidence ever found. Law enforcement suspected foul play immediately. A 29-year-old Illinois man was questioned after witnesses saw him with Miles at the cafe. Though he claimed to have been in Illinois applying for a job that day, no application was ever found. Despite passing a lie detector test and being cleared, his alibi remained suspicious. As the case began to grow cold, Police Chief James O'Keefe contacted the FBI. They considered posting a nationwide bulletin for Miles, but unfortunately, these efforts did not bring any new information. In 2013, Miles's niece Jackie was interviewed for a journal story on the case and expressed her belief that the truth about her uncle's disappearance might never be uncovered. Today, over 64 years later, Miles Dougherty's disappearance is still a baffling mystery. Anyone have any comments or questions on that case? All right. The next case takes us way back to the summer of 1917, when Sioux City was rocked by a tragedy that remains unsolved to this day, the murder of Thekla Gherkin. Thekla Gherkin was a 23-year-old school teacher from Woonsocket, South Dakota. In the summer of 1917, she was en route to Dubuque, Iowa to begin a new teaching position, and she decided to stop in Sioux City for a few days to visit with friends. She was staying with Hazel and Dr. Henry Hagedorn at their home on 1017 Jones Street. On the evening of June 27, 1917, Thekla met with her friend Mabel Houlihan, who lived nearby, for a downtown stroll. Around 10 o'clock, they headed home, parting ways at 9th Street. Mabel turning east toward her house, Thekla continuing north to the Hagedorns. Minutes later, the peaceful night was shattered when Mabel heard Thekla desperately screaming for her to return, followed by the chilling crack of a gunshot echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Mabel rushed back and discovered Thekla lying in the street with a gunshot wound to her chest. Stunned and confused, Mabel struggled to comprehend the horrific scene unfolding before her eyes. Residents quickly gathered and carried Thekla to the curb. An ambulance rushed her to St. Vincent's Hospital, but it was too late. Thekla died shortly after arrival. Police also arrived swiftly, but the shooter had vanished without a trace. Detectives canvassed the area and interviewed Mabel and several witnesses. Mabel remembered passing a young man who resembled a drifter. His presence had made her uncomfortable, though he hadn't engaged with the women. One neighbor reported overhearing a conversation between a man and a woman outside, followed by the woman's cry, "George, why did you do that?" and then the gunshot. Detectives quickly focused on identifying this George, but the lead went nowhere. Soon, additional details about Thekla's evening came to light. Detectives learned that Thekla and Mabel had originally planned to attend a dance with two young men. After waiting most of the night for their dates who never arrived, the women had decided to go out by themselves. The investigation eventually cleared these potential suitors when they provided evidence they had attended the dance with two other women. Witnesses also mentioned seeing Thekla earlier that day on the porch, abruptly ending a conversation with the young man by going inside and closing the door, fueling speculation that she may have been avoiding a persistent suitor, possibly someone who had followed her from Woonsocket. With the Sioux City investigation yielding few leads, detectives shifted their focus to Woonsocket to gain insight into Thekla's background and personal history. Although they described their visit as fruitful, they returned seemingly no closer to solving the case. The public grew increasingly restless as the perpetrator remained at large. Residents of Woonsocket collected funds to offer a reward, hoping to expedite the investigation. With each passing day, law enforcement officials began to suspect that the culprit might have fled far away, potentially to another country. The investigation suffered a major setback when crucial evidence, Thekla's clothing and the fatal bullet, was destroyed before it could be properly examined. Though forensic science was limited at the time, this loss hindered the case further. As the investigation continued, several theories emerged. Perhaps Thekla was killed in a case of mistaken identity, or maybe she was the target of a jealous rival. Law enforcement repeatedly assured the public they were making progress and closing in on the suspect. These promises, however, never materialized. The investigation gradually deteriorated into a debacle, and what little momentum remained eventually dissipated amid the distractions of wartime. In the years that followed, the Journal called Thekla's murder a dark blot on the fair name of Sioux City. Even decades later, the case was remembered as one of the most mysterious shrouded murders in the history of Sioux City. Today, more than a century later, the murder of Thekla Gherkin, a young woman whose life was cut short, remains unsolved. Anyone have anything for that one? Questions or comments? All right. The next case takes place in the same era, in 1919, when Sioux City became the stage for a dramatic and deadly confrontation between law enforcement and one of the Midwest's most notorious gangs. Detective James Garfield Britton was a respected veteran of the Sioux City Police Department. He had earned a reputation for his relentless pursuit of criminals and was determined to bring down the Burzett Gang, a group responsible for a string of robberies, hijackings, and murders across several states. At the center of this criminal enterprise was Donald "Red" Burzett, a man who had managed to evade capture for more than 2 years. Red was well aware that Detective Britton was closing in, and he made his intentions clear. If they ever met, he would shoot Britton before the detective could even draw his weapon. On the morning of July 22, 1919, Red Burzett and 2 of his men, Jim Davis and Tex Maynard, stole a tire at gunpoint from the Mandel garage at West 7th and Pearl Streets. The attendant overheard the men planning to visit the Car Barn restaurant the next day and quickly alerted his father, a police officer. Officers rushed to inform Detective Britton at his home, and a team was assembled to intercept the gang. The Car Barn restaurant at 1605 West 3rd Street was a popular gathering place for streetcar workers. That morning, Burzett and his men entered, sat near the door, and ordered coffee, each keeping a hand on their concealed weapons. Detective Britton led the officers into the restaurant. As soon as he entered, he identified Red Burzett and ordered the men to show their hands. Red appeared to comply, but in a split second, he drew his revolver and fired at Britton. The detective fired back, striking Burzett, who died instantly. In the chaos that followed, 17 shots were exchanged in just 10 seconds, filling the room with smoke and panic. When the gunfire ceased, both Jim Davis and Tex Maynard also lie wounded, having been struck by Officer Maurice Farley. Despite being gravely injured, Detective Britton managed to walk to the police car and climb the stairs at St. Vincent's Hospital without assistance. Tragically, he died from his wounds that afternoon. Davis and Maynard, though severely wounded, were expected to recover. Once recovered, Davis and Maynard faced prosecution for their parts in the gun battle and Detective Britton's murder. According to testimony from 2 eyewitnesses, the restaurant's proprietor and a waitress, Jim Davis fired 2 shots that struck Detective Britton. Davis received a life sentence and was sent to Fort Madison, but his time behind bars was short-lived. In 1921, he escaped from prison, resumed his criminal career, and participated in a notable robbery in Clinton, Iowa, where he shot another officer. Davis evaded authorities until 1929, when he was finally captured in Vancouver. After serving additional years, he was pardoned by the governor in 1943 and returned to Sioux City, where he died just a few months later. Tex Maynard was charged with carrying a concealed weapon and received a 10-year sentence. Upon completing his term, he briefly returned to Sioux City, where he worked as a bartender before vanishing from the public eye. Detective Britton's sacrifice deeply affected his wife and 4-year-old daughter, Maxine, his fellow officers, and the community. In response, local citizens and organizations raised over $10,000 to support his widow and daughter. The Car Barn restaurant building was eventually demolished in 1942, and its materials were repurposed for chicken coops. In honor of her late father, Maxine named her firstborn son after him. In 1966, his grandson, James Britton Cornelia, continued the family legacy by joining the Sioux City Police Department. Detective Britton's service and sacrifice are commemorated at both the Public Safety Memorial near City Hall and the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. All right, anyone have any comments or questions? Yes.
Where was St. Vincent's Hospital
Okay, someone's asking where St. Vincent's Hospital was located, and I know this, but I can't think. Anyone know? Is it where Mercy is?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was Mercy, yes.
Oh, where Mercy?
Yes, that hospital, yes. That's what I thought, so.
That makes sense because there's something about Vincent's nurses or something.
Oh, okay, yes. Anyone else? Okay, let's move on. Although the 1950s are often remembered for their optimism and close-knit neighborhoods, this era marked a dark chapter in Sioux City's history. The community experienced a series of tragedies and scandals, including the next case, the brutal murder of Jimmy Bremmers in 1954. Jimmy Bremmers was an 8-year-old boy living with his family on West Cottage Avenue in what is now the Lust Hills Elementary area. On the evening of August 31st, 1954, Jimmy was playing at his friend Joey's house, just a block from home. As darkness began to fall at about 8 p.m., Jimmy and Joey's cousin Steve left together to head home. Steve would be the last to see Jimmy alive, catching a final glimpse of him under a streetlight before heading in the opposite direction. When Jimmy didn't return home by dark, his parents immediately sensed something was wrong. He was a responsible child who never stayed out that late. By nightfall, police and neighbors were out searching with flashlights. The next day, nearly 300 volunteers began combing the woods and fields in the area. Police interviewed neighbors, following up on every lead, including a report of an unfamiliar car seen in the neighborhood. As the days passed, the search intensified. The Iowa National Guard even provided a helicopter to scan overhead. Jimmy's mother, convinced her son had been kidnapped, made a public plea, but police held back from labeling it an abduction without concrete evidence. Attention soon turned to Ernest Triplett, a 50-year-old door-to-door music salesman who had been seen in the neighborhood that night and was identified as the driver of the suspicious car. Triplett had a concerning background, including prior allegations of inappropriate behavior involving a minor. A polygraph machine from Omaha was used in the investigation, with the administering officer deeming Triplett definitely psychopathic after observing his behavior. During questioning, his story changed several times. He initially claimed to have briefly spoken with a boy resembling Jimmy before returning to his hotel, but later said he'd been in Riverside. There was also an hour-long gap in his timeline that matched when Jimmy was last seen alive. While the polygraph results weren't definitive, investigators found that the interview process itself revealed important information. Within days of the disappearance, investigators discovered a man's blue suit and rust-colored shirt abandoned on Plum Creek Road. Though authorities suspected these items were connected to the case, ultraviolet examination revealed nothing unusual. An expert from the University of Iowa soon arrived to review the investigation and administered another lie detector test to the suspect, which indicated deception. The suspect was then transferred to Cherokee's Mental Health Institute for a psychiatric evaluation. Police emphasized this was voluntary. The search intensified again when the National Guard and the Boy Scouts joined forces, launching the largest hunt in Siouxland's history, spanning 4 counties. Despite this extensive effort, no evidence emerged, leaving police at a standstill. Nearly 1 month after Jimmy's disappearance, a Plymouth County maintenance crew made a heartbreaking discovery in a pasture along Ridge Road: the remains of a young boy. The body, badly decomposed and with his head and hands severed, had clearly been exposed for some time. Investigators were certain it was Jimmy. Because of the condition of the remains, his parents were spared the trauma of viewing the body, but Mrs. Bremmers was able to identify her son's clothing. When the Sioux City Journal reported the discovery, their front page story included a photograph of the scene. The Bremmers family successfully sued the Journal over this. That entire issue has since disappeared from all public archives. After the discovery, police identified Ernest Triplett, who remained in Cherokee, as their primary suspect, and he was returned to Sioux City for further interrogation. Prior to a recorded interview, Triplett had gone without food for over 24 hours and received amphetamine and barbiturate injections. In this state, he confessed to being with Jimmy when he disappeared and detailed the events leading to Jimmy's death. Triplett was then involuntarily recommitted to the State Mental Health Institute. Triplett's taped confession became central evidence leading to his indictment for murder. His trial, being held in Lamar's, began in June 1955. Witnesses, including Jimmy's parents, testified. One neighbor recalled Triplett seemed odd because he wasn't wearing socks during a sales call. After just over 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Triplett guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The judge described him as a perverted, depraved, and sadistic murderer, utterly devoid of the slightest conception of moral obligations. Triplett insisted all along that he was not guilty. Almost 3 years later, Triplett appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court, arguing that his 29-day detention without charge was unconstitutional and that his confession was coerced. The court upheld the conviction. In 1972, after 17 years in prison, Triplett appealed again, this time focusing on the forced drug injections before his confession. The judge ruled that his conviction was based on illegally obtained evidence and ordered his release. Triplett was never retried, and no other suspects have ever been sought in the case of Jimmy Bremmers, leaving his murder unsolved to this day. Anyone have anything on?
So what happened to him when Triplett then? When he was released?
As far as, I couldn't find too much, but as far as I could find, he went, I have to repeat the question for our Zoom viewers. Someone's asking what happened to Mr. Triplett after his release, and what I've been able to find is that he went somewhere over on the eastern side of Iowa and lived out his years. He's no longer alive.
So the practice that they undertook of drugging him to coerce some type of confession, once he brought this to light that done fairly bad, did that then shine a light on other cases where that same behavior was taken by the police force?
So someone's asking about the drug injections and if that was, well, my thought was, is this a normal thing that happens in cases, and then if that changed the way cases were done. And I think just probably with the time from the 50s to the 70s, things did change, and I think that they thought they had their guy and they were going to do what they needed to do to get his confession out of him. So I don't know if that was always the norm, but in this case, they felt it was appropriate for some reason, so. Yes.
To tag on to that, so did they have a doctor come in and give him injections? Or another policeman was like, hey, we can get some drugs and all?
So someone's asking if a doctor was involved. Since he was at the Mental Health Institute, the answer is I don't know. It didn't say,
okay.
But I'm guessing since he had been dealing with the mental health in the state hospital that there was some sort of doctor involved.
I was thinking of him sitting in the police.
Right. In which it did look like he came back to Sioux City, but I'm guessing there were still like professionals involved in the case, so, yes.
I noticed that the word clue is spelled C-L-E-W. In 1917, it didn't surprise me. 1954 is fairly...
Yes. So someone's asking about clue. I get asked this almost every time. And it's weird because I looked it up and it said that was normal spelling in like 16th century because clue meant like a thread, like a piece of yarn leading to something. But yeah, it was not normal in the 50s. I don't know why the journal continued to use that spelling. I think about the 50s was the cutoff when they changed it to the proper spelling now. But yeah, I get asked that every time. Yes.
The book Framed, John Grisham wrote part of that book. It's an amazing book about how many of all the people that they wrote about had coercive interrogations by the police, and how that they are trying to bring out how people were on death row, and one guy did end up going to death on death row. So with these kinds of, I mean, to even give them drugs is really over the top. But this is still going on today.
It wasn't uncommon, though,
So I worked in Cherokee. It's not uncommon to give those meds. Even today, they give a lot of those meds.
When you're interrogated?
No, he probably had them while he was
In
in
the
the
hospital.
institution, and then they
Yes.
just
So it's
didn't
not
get
uncommon to give them when they're
Before they
hospitalized on the
interviewed them.
psychiatric unit. So then what happens is they get off of the psychiatric unit, and then they still have to be on medications. So back then, you gave Thorazine, you gave all those meds, those were the only meds that were around.
Right.
So when they got out, they continued to take those medications. So it's kind of, I mean, it makes it hard because today, if you go onto a psych unit, I mean, they're not giving you Thorazine unless it's really needed, but there's less medications for psychiatric care that, you know, are sedatives. And so it kind of makes it hard because back then, they were still on the sedatives even when they got out. So when do you really do your interrogation?
So we're just having conversation about we had a recommendation about the book Framed by John Grisham, which kind of discusses these cases and coerced confessions and then the drugs that are given in psychiatric hospitals. I think my opinion of this case is that Mr. Triplett, his only ailment was that he was a gay man. And they were like, oh, you're mental, you need to go to the hospital, so.
Which was common.
Yes.
It was very, very, very common.
Yes.
That's where.
So yes, it's a complicated case and that's, I don't know. Yes.
I'm presently working on a cold case from Minnesota. She's 50 years old. And it was not unusual. I'm working with the deputy sheriff who actually was in charge of the case then. And from 75, it was not unusual for them when they did lie detectors to also give them truth serum.
Oh.
And I'm not sure what that is made up of, but I know they did use it.
Yes. So we have another audience member that's talking about working on a cold case in Minnesota, and people are given truth serum when they're confined, so I've definitely heard that
And it
too,
wasn't
so.
confined.
They just used it for lie detectors, that's what you said, yeah. Yes.
When they really thought the suspect would try to lie about things, they would add that to the lie detector to make sure they were telling the truth.
I see.
They were using it, there was cops that were suspected of it.
Oh, sure.
And they used them on that.
Yeah, so it's complicated and changing with the times, hopefully, eventually. All right, we're gonna move on to our next one. So, as Sioux City was still mourning the loss of Jimmy Bremmers, the summer of 1955 brought an even deeper darkness when 21-month-old Donna Sue Davis was taken from her crib in the night, shattering any remaining sense of safety for families across the city. Donna Sue Davis was just 3 months shy of her second birthday on July 10th, 1955. That evening, the Davis family was at their home in their main floor duplex at 715 Isabella Street. After bathing Donna and dressing her in pajamas, Mrs. Davis put her to bed around 9:30 in the bedroom she shared with her parents. Mrs. Davis then read the newspaper in the kitchen while Mr. Davis watched television in the living room. Neither noticed anything unusual. About a half an hour later, Mr. Davis went to bed and discovered Donna Sue missing from her crib. He frantically checked the blankets and called out to his wife. Noticing the window screen was gone, he concluded that someone had entered through the window and had taken their daughter. The Davises immediately called police, who responded quickly. Officers and several neighbors began searching the area for Donna Sue. The family insisted they had no family problems or enemies and couldn't imagine anyone wanting to harm their child. Witnesses reported seeing a strange man in the neighborhood that night. One household had even called the police to report a prowler who had startled their dog. They recalled this man was slender, about 30 years old, 5'11", with dark, closely cut hair parted to one side, wearing a white t-shirt and suntan trousers. Residents were asked to check their homes and yards for any baby garments or suspicious items, and to be alert for anyone carrying a bundle or a child behaving unusually. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a man with a bundle, but no blankets were missing from the Davis home. With no ransom note and no family troubles, police suspected a sexually motivated crime and began reviewing files of known offenders. Less than 24 hours later, 2 farmers' wives, who were sisters-in-law, found Donna Sue Davis's body in their field in South Sioux City. Earlier that day, one of their husbands had found baby clothing while riding his tractor. Acting on intuition, the women searched the same area with their daughters, who soon screamed upon discovering a lifeless Donna Sue. Authorities were called, and examination of the scene confirmed that ransom was not the motive. Donna Sue had died from blunt force trauma to the head, but suffered numerous additional injuries. The community, still reeling from the murder of Jimmy Bremmers, erupted in fear and outrage, demanding stricter laws and better protections for children. This climate of fear and suspicion is vividly depicted in Neil Miller's Sex Crime Panic, which documents how these child murders led to a moral panic in Sioux City. In response, police rounded up and institutionalized dozens of men as sexual psychopaths, most of whom had no connection to the crimes. For years, law enforcement pursued every lead, questioning suspects and even receiving a few false confessions. They believed the suspect lived nearby and was familiar with the family, but nothing ever led to an arrest. Jody Ewing, founder of the Iowa Cold Cases, has worked to keep Donna Sue's case in the public eye. Ewing has confirmed the existence of DNA evidence and blood samples, but testing has never been conclusive. Donna Sue's story remains one of the city's most heartbreaking unresolved tragedies. Any comments on that one or questions?
They're positive it was a man who took her, and not someone who had lost a child.
I think they're positive that it's a man. Someone's asking if they were positive it was a man, and I believe that's what I've gathered. I know my father-in-law's done a lot of research on this too, and it's really heartbreaking. I think people have a pretty good idea of who it was, they just didn't have enough to connect him.
This case, my grandpa was the one whose dog was barking.
Oh, wow.
So he passed away last year, but this case, I mean, it took him, because he knew the family and he knew her.
Yes. So someone in the audience is saying their grandpa was the person with the dog in the neighborhood. I just think to my grandparents had small children at that time, and I'm like, I can't even imagine. My grandma was a worrywart anyway, and she probably just lost it. So very frightening. Yes. Okay, anyone else? We will get out of the 50s. Next, we're going back to the previous decade, the fall of 1945, when a shocking murder exposed family secrets and brought about a landmark moment in Sioux City's legal history. The body of an unidentified man was found floating in the Missouri River near Homer, Nebraska on September 24th, 1945. Less than a week later, before authorities received a positive identification, the man was buried in Dakota City at the county's expense. A few weeks after the burial, a mother and her 2 daughters reported their son and brother missing to the Dakota County Sheriff. They were shown photos of the recently unidentified man and his clothing, and they recognized him as their family member, 39-year-old Don Hoover. His body was exhumed, and an autopsy further confirmed his identity through fingerprints and dental records. Authorities discovered he had died from gunshot wounds. Don Hoover was known as Dope King and had a history of criminal activity, including bootlegging, robbery, narcotics, and spousal abuse. Investigators began looking into his recent associations and soon detained 2 suspects: Don's widow, 29-year-old Violet Hoover, and his brother, 31-year-old Kavanaugh Bud Hoover. Bud immediately confessed that on the night of September 13th, he entered Don and Violet's room at the Travelers Hotel at 316 Virginia Street, where Violet was manager. An argument broke out and Don pulled a knife, threatening Bud while Violet fled to the bathroom. As Don tried to leave, Bud grabbed a shotgun, fired, and struck him, causing Don to collapse into the hall. Bud said Violet then helped him place Don's body in a garbage container and clean up the blood. After sharing a drink to steady their nerves, they moved the container to Violet's car. Then they drove to the foot of Virginia Street, stopping at the bank of the Missouri River, rolled the container down, and dumped Don's body into the water. When they returned to the hotel, they washed out the container. In early October, before Don's murder was uncovered, but more than 2 weeks after his death, Violet filed for divorce on grounds of cruelty. Though when questioned, she maintained she was not involved in the murder. When the case reached the grand jury, Violet's attorney objected to the all-male panel, rationalizing that they could not fairly evaluate her case. The judge overruled, noting that no woman had ever served on a jury in the history of Woodbury County. Court officials elaborated that this was not intentional. It was merely a coincidence that a woman's name had never been drawn in the juror lottery. Violet's legal team next argued that both Violet and Bud had suffered abuse from Don and that Bud acted in self-defense. The pair were initially set to be tried together, but Violet successfully petitioned for a separate trial. She remained in jail until December, when the judge finally agreed that the all-male jury was unfair. Violet then posted a $6,000 bond and was released temporarily. Violet's indictment was reinstated, and for the first time in Woodbury County, a woman was seated on the grand jury. At trial, a hotel boarder testified to hearing the argument and gunshots, then saw Bud mopping up the blood outside the Hoovers' room. Bud reportedly told him, "It's okay, pal. Go ahead and go back in your room." He then saw Bud and Violet leaving in her car with the garbage container. A detective recalled Violet's remark to his question about how they fit the body in the container. She said, "Next time we kill a man, we better kill a small one, so we won't need such a big garbage can." Bud also pleaded not guilty, claiming self-defense, but in February 1946, he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. In a last-minute decision, Violet changed her plea to guilty of second-degree murder and received a 10-year sentence. Most families dealing with drama never have to worry about whether their garbage can is big enough. But as this case shows, sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Any comments or questions? Yes.
Do we know how they created the jury pool at that time? Because now it's based on like driver's license and things like that, but most women didn't drive.
Sure. So someone's asking if we know how the jury pool was created. I'm not sure. It said the lottery, so I don't know what lottery, how the names were put in the lottery back then. But I have a feeling they just didn't want a woman on the jury because all of a sudden they found one. So yeah, I'm not sure. I should look that up. I'm not sure. Okay.
Did they both serve out their full sentences?
I believe so. I couldn't, sometimes I try to track people, or someone's asking if they've served out their whole sentences, and usually if they got paroled or something, I have found something and I wasn't able to find anything after that. So they usually ship them off to somewhere else in the state, and then I've found a lot of times they just stay where they get out of prison or go off to somewhere else. So. The next case is the chilling triple homicide, which occurred in December of 1974 in Morningside. It's another case that remains on Sioux City's list of unsolved crimes. On December 3rd, 1974, Jesse Haney, age 26, Ernest William Billy Esom II, age 27, and Frida Bostic, age 24, were found deceased in their rented home at 1117 Morningside Avenue. Billy was originally from Kansas, Jesse from Montana, and Frida from North Carolina. The trio had recently spent time together in Colorado before moving to Sioux City just over 1 month earlier. Billy and Frida were married by common law, and Frida was 4 months pregnant at the time of her death. She was known for her artistic talent and had several of her drawings throughout the home. Both Jesse and Billy were Vietnam veterans working as Boilermakers at Port Neal Station, where Billy's father served as supervisor. On December 3rd, when Jesse and Billy failed to show up for work, Billy's father asked his wife Harriet to check on them. Harriet and a neighbor entered the house and found a horrific scene. Frida, in a robe, was face down between the living room and dining rooms. Jesse, fully dressed in a winter coat, was propped against a closed door in the hallway. Billy, nude, was half on and half off a mattress in the living room. It appeared all three had been shot execution style, with Billy's position and blood evidence suggesting he tried to escape. Police noted that the thermostat was set to 80 degrees, making the house unusually warm, and 2 dogs were inside, one locked in the bathroom, but both were unharmed. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransacking, and nothing significant appeared to be missing. 2 firearms were found, one in the closet and one in Jesse's lunchbox in his car, but neither matched the caliber of the murder weapon. Investigators began piecing together the group's last known activities. On Saturday, November 30th, the 3 had gone out to the Jet Bar downtown, then brought friends back to their house for a party. Frida and Billy planned to visit his parents the next day, but they never showed. A friend also stopped by on Sunday and got no answer. Their landlord, concerned about unpaid rent, visited the house on Monday and saw their car covered in snow, with no footprints leading away. By Tuesday, Billy and Jesse had missed multiple days of work. The investigation quickly zeroed in on drug involvement as a key motive. The victims all had minor criminal histories and connections to drug circles. Inside the house, investigators discovered marijuana and traces of harder substances. Jesse had recently told his brother he feared for his safety due to trouble with a dealer. Adding weight to this theory, an anonymous source indicated Jesse had testified against a drug kingpin in Colorado, while a witness recently spotted a Colorado-plated vehicle near the house. Police also considered other theories, including tensions at Port Neal Station over unionization. A co-worker and his girlfriend, who abruptly quit that same week and fled to New Mexico, were questioned but cleared. Given the group's short time in Sioux City and their transient lifestyle, investigators believed it was unlikely they had made local enemies and suspected the murders were a professional hit with connections to their past. Adding to the house's grim history, less than 3 years earlier, an elderly couple, retired dentist Dr. Larson and his wife, had been found dead in the same home from age and malnutrition. The house was torn down within a year of the triple homicide, making room to expand the Nelson Berger Funeral Home parking lot. Despite exhaustive efforts and periodic re-examinations, the Morningside triple murder remains a cold case to this day. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that one? Okay. The next case takes us to a summer morning in 1925 when a pair of children made a discovery that would leave Sioux City with another sensational mystery. 10-year-old Goldie Hanafius and her brother Theodore were playing outside their home at 1300 7th Street on July 13, 1925, around 10 a.m. Goldie noticed a foul odor coming from the neighboring house and decided to look through the window. She saw hundreds of flies swarming on the inside of the glass and called her brother over. Together, they peered into the dimly lit home and saw the motionless bodies of the 2 sisters who lived there, 59-year-old Josephine Goodwin and 55-year-old Elizabeth Anthony. One was lying on a mattress in the living room, the other propped against the davenport. Realizing something was terribly wrong, the children screamed and ran home to tell their mother, who confirmed their shocking discovery and called the police. By the time officers arrived, a crowd of neighbors had gathered. When the police entered the house, they were overwhelmed by the smell of gas that had filled every room. The number of flies suggested the women had been dead for some time, and their bodies indicated little or no struggle. Investigators quickly ruled out a cooking incident, noting the stove ran on kerosene, not gas. Instead, they discovered a section of the gas pipe used to connect the main line from the street had been removed from beneath the floorboards and was missing. Neighbors reported a man frequently visiting the sisters' home and was allegedly romantically involved with both women. The Friday before their deaths, witnesses observed him striking the women during an argument on the porch and then dragging them inside. Neither the sisters nor the man were seen afterward. Police investigated multiple possibilities, including foul play, sororicide, and accidental asphyxiation, while searching for the missing visitor who might provide answers. Among those questioned was Josephine's former husband, James Goodwin. He told officers their relationship was amicable and that he had spoken with Josephine recently. However, as the interview progressed, one of the detectives accidentally dropped a worn newspaper clipping from 1919. The article detailed Josephine's plea for divorce in which she accused James of physically abusing her. Seeing the clipping, James was visibly shaken and wiped away a tear before regaining his composure and continuing the interview. This revelation raised questions about past conflicts and a possible motive, but ultimately authorities could not tie James to the deaths. A few days later, Mrs. Hanafius and another neighbor found the missing gas pipe, hidden in the weeds about 10 feet behind the sisters' house. Investigators determined that removing the pipe would have required crawling under the floorboards through a small trapdoor, something unlikely for either sister to have done themselves, further suggesting outside involvement. Authorities also noticed that diamond rings were missing from the trunk where the sisters kept their jewelry. Later that week, a camper in Stone Park reported that a disheveled man had approached him trying to sell 2 women's diamond rings, then asked if he read the morning paper. When the camper said no, the man fled into the woods. The camper visited the park caretaker's cabin and upon reading the article about the missing rings, immediately contacted police. The man's description matched the mysterious visitor seen at the sisters' house. After weeks of searching, police publicly named their suspect as Arthur Archie Blanchard. On September 23, 1925, Blanchard was finally detained while withdrawing money at a local bank. Investigators determined he was likely the last person to see the sisters alive. During questioning, Blanchard admitted to knowing the women as friends and being at their house just before their deaths, but insisted he left Sioux City the next day by freight train, headed to South Dakota for harvest work. He claimed he only learned of their deaths later as a mere rumor. Blanchard was interrogated for hours and provided a detailed account of his whereabouts. Notably, he also had no criminal record. Despite the circumstantial evidence and the public's suspicion, authorities could not establish a motive or conclusive connection between Archie Blanchard and the deaths. The case reached a dead end when Archie was released, and the mysterious deaths were left unresolved. Anybody have any questions or comments on that case? Okay. The next case occurred in the spring of 1998 when a seemingly routine sales transaction in rural Woodbury County turned into a haunting, unsolved murder. Patricia Giron, known as Pat, was in her early 40s when she retired in 1995 from her position as secretary at Sergeant Bluff Middle School, a role she had earned after working her way up from a library aide. Although she was still young, Pat chose to retire early so she could travel with her husband, Gene, who was nearly 2 decades older and had also retired. Pat had continued to serve the community as an active member of the Sergeant Bluff School Board, but a recent move just across the street placed her in the Sioux City School District, requiring her to step down from her board position. The couple had inherited their new home on Old Highway 141 from a longtime elderly neighbor and were still in the process of selling their other house. On the morning of May 26, 1998, Pat returned to their old house to meet someone interested in buying a waterbed they'd advertised on KSCJ's Swap Shop radio program. Gene, at home in their new residence, noticed a red car parked nearby and assumed it belonged to the buyer. When Pat didn't return and the red car was gone, Gene grew worried and walked over to check on her. Inside, Gene was confronted with a horrifying sight. He found the waterbed drenched in blood and a trail leading out of the house, suggesting Pat had been injured and tried to leave. He immediately called 911. While authorities were dispatched, Gene discovered Pat's brutally murdered body just over an embankment on the property. Gene was convinced the individual driving the red car was responsible. Years later, he stated he was certain he'd seen this person at their previously held yard sale and believed he had heard their radio ad and decided to return. Authorities initially withheld details about the cause of death to protect the investigation, but did confirm foul play and urged the public to come forward with any information about Pat's murder or the red car. Investigators believed the nature of the attack indicated a deeply personal motive, likely committed by someone who knew Pat or was at least acquainted with her. They emphasized that they did not believe the public was at risk. By all accounts, Pat was cherished by everyone in her life, including her former colleagues and the numerous children she had dedicated her time to. Law enforcement worked diligently, canvassing the area, interviewing witnesses, and utilizing all available resources. Crime Stoppers offered a $1,000 reward, which combined with community donations grew to $6,000 for information leading to an arrest. Months later, the case was turned over to the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime to develop a behavioral profile of the perpetrator, hoping to compare it to other murders and known serial killers nationwide. 1 year later, the investigation was still at a standstill, causing frustration among law enforcement officials who had yet to identify any significant leads or suspects. They were still eagerly awaiting the profile analysis, which is a lengthy process. Unfortunately, nothing was ever mentioned publicly about the analysis again. By 2002, 4 years after the murder, authorities reopened the case and conducted new interviews with witnesses, hoping to uncover fresh leads. Despite their efforts, the investigation again reached a dead end. The podcast Last Seen Alive recently featured Patricia Duran's case. The show explored a theory connecting Pat's murder to a serial killer, noting similarities with cases where victims were targeted through classified ads, referencing criminals like Bobby Joe Long and the classified ad rapist. Though no confirmed link exists, this podcast suggested Pat's death might fit this pattern. Patricia's murder remains open, with law enforcement and those who knew her still hoping that one day they will see justice. Any comments or questions about
The classified ad rapist was in prison.
during that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
he may have been executed before then, if not after, but
Okay.
I just watched something on that.
So someone's saying the classified ad rapist was in prison at the time of Patricia's murder. So, and maybe they were just like saying killers like that
Yeah.
too. So I thought that was interesting because I have covered Pat's case before this podcast came out, and then I listened to this podcast and I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard of that as a theory in her case
I
yet. So
thought they did release her cause of death.
they did.
Okay.
I'm just not. You can look it up. It's pretty brutal. So.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I thought they released
It's, like I say, I try not to put too many brutal details, but they did. She was definitely brutally murdered, so pretty scary. All right, we'll move on. I have one last case.
But they never did, they never solved that.
No, her case has not been solved, and it's still fairly recent. I mean, late 90s is recent to me. 27 years, but.
Was the waterbed gone then? Did the person take the waterbed?
So someone's asking if the waterbed was gone. No, the waterbed was there. And I had read something too. I try to make these shorter so I can do more cases, but I had read that the person that her husband suspected was someone that had purchased a dresser from them at the yard sale and never came back to pick it up too. So, yes.
I wonder if it was a former student from the school.
And I had heard at one of my other talks that the person that they inherited the house from there was some bad blood because she gave them the house and not her. There was still family in the area. So there was bad blood there. I always at first was like, was it the husband? Because it's always the husband, right? And he was like over 2 decades older than her. It was interesting.
So just that I was an assistant, a teacher's assistant, and a former student came and repaired my
air conditioner today.
Oh, gosh. So someone had asked if it could have been a former student, but yeah, and yeah, you just don't know when you're out in the community
Yeah.
like that too. It's pretty sad. Okay, last case. This last case takes us way back to 1895. And I have to say, it's one of the cases that have stood out to me the most. Not so much the murder itself, but the shocking twist at the end. Okay. 24-year-old Nellie Patton was boarding at the notorious Need brothel on Pearl Street in November 1895. Though still legally married, she had been estranged from her husband for 4 years. Their young daughter had been adopted by the Hendrickson family in Elk Point. For 3 years, Nellie had lived with her lover, William P. Royce, a well-known local who was also 24. After Nellie developed a tumor, William paid for her operation and visited her often during recovery in Yankton. However, upon her return to Sioux City, William learned she had taken up with another lover, triggering violent quarrels between them. Mrs. Need, the brothel's owner, later testified that Nellie would return with black eyes and bite marks and confided that William had threatened her life. On November 24th, 1895, after drinking heavily, William rented a revolver from Lyons's gun store for 50 cents. He then went to the Need house asking to see Nellie. Mrs. Need, suspicious, patted him down but missed the gun hidden on his right hip. William convinced her he meant no harm, so Nellie was called down to the parlor. William repeatedly asked Nellie to take him to her room or send the others away, but she refused. After sharing a cigarette, Nellie finally agreed to go upstairs. As she stood, William sprang up, shouted, "No, you don't," and shot Nellie twice in the abdomen. Mrs. Need and another resident rushed to help Nellie, but William turned the gun on them. It misfired, and he fled. William ran straight to the police station, confessed to shooting Nellie, and was immediately arrested. Still conscious, Nellie asked for water and for her new lover, who arrived quickly. A physician and priest were also called, but sadly Nellie died just about an hour later. News of the murder spread quickly, drawing crowds of hundreds to Nellie's funeral. Meanwhile, a reporter visited William in jail. William appeared mostly cheerful, except for his desire for more cigarettes and his eagerness to talk about Nellie's betrayal and the money he'd given her. The reporter also visited William's family. His mother and sister were devastated, with his mother especially grief-stricken and barely able to walk. At his first court appearance, William showed little concern, even smiling at acquaintances in the packed courtroom. Although he signed a confession, he pleaded not guilty. At his second appearance, looking disheveled, his lawyers entered a plea of not guilty by reason of emotional insanity, citing his mental state and the laudanum found in his coat pocket, suggesting he intended to end his own life after the shooting. On the day his trial was to begin, William met privately with his lawyers, then changed his plea to guilty of second-degree murder to spare his family the ordeal of a trial. He was sentenced to 17 and a half years in prison, a sentence many in the community found shockingly lenient. The judge justified it by expressing hope that William, still young, could reform. Just after 4 years later, William was paroled after a sheriff advocated for him, citing his mother's suffering and William's good behavior and skill development in prison. Upon release, William returned to Sioux City, found work, and resolved to live a better life. In 1923, he even saved a coworker's life while employed at the Sioux City Gas and Electric Company. Soon after his return, William sought out Nellie's children to apologize for taking their mother's life. In a remarkable twist, he and Nellie's daughter, Loretta, formed a relationship that turned romantic, eventually leading to marriage and children of their own. Their eldest daughter, Langley Louise Royce, lived in Sioux City until her death in 2004 at the age of 95. And that's all I have. Thank you, everyone.